The kidnapping and gruesome murder of 6-year-old Suzanne Degnan shocked and terrified Chicagoans in 1946. After 6 frustrating months of dead-end leads, the police arrested a 17-year-old University of Chicago student for burglary. Overnight, he became an accused murderer in the highly publicized Degnan case.
When you're convicted in the newspapers, as happened then, that is your trial.
For 5 daily newspapers competing to attract Chicago readers, William Herron's ordeal dwarfed any other news of the day. In this race to report new developments, some newspaper stories drew conclusions before the legal system could draw its own conclusions. That altered public opinion and possibly the legal process. It's been nearly half a century, and this crime is still in litigation. The emotional proceedings involving William Herron's often overshadow the legal ramifications of the entire story. Our account differs from what was reported in newspapers in 1946 and sheds important light on our legal system today. The euphoria of our World War II victory quickly gave way to high crime and rationing in post-war Chicago. The Federal Office of Price Administration was responsible for price controls and rationing, but certain industries resisted control. The OPA transferred James Degnan from Washington to Chicago to help administer the federal guidelines in the Midwest. Degnan, his wife, and 2 daughters shared a house at Kenmore in Thorndale near Edgewater Beach. On Sunday evening, January 6, 10-year-old Elizabeth Degnan, now Betty Finn, slept in the bedroom next to her 6-year-old sister, Suzanne. I know you've retold the story over and over, what happened that night to Suzanne. Could you tell it once again?
It was the first day back to school. We were excited about going back to see our friends again, and went to bed, and when we woke up in the morning, Suzanne wasn't there. So it was pretty terrifying. We just didn't know what happened, and all of a sudden the police are there. The front yard is just packed with reporters.
The mystery of Suzanne's disappearance didn't last long. Chicago police quickly discovered a ransom note on the floor of her bedroom. James Degnan went on the radio to plead with the kidnappers for Suzanne's safe return. Responding to one of the many tips and telephone calls the police received, workmen discovered Suzanne's head floating in a sewer half a block from the Degnan home. Other parts of her body were found in sewers throughout the neighborhood. When Suzanne was found, how did your family react?
Well, obviously it was terrible. I remember the parish priest was with us, Father Kearney, and I remember when he told me and my parents.
You were there then? They didn't try to keep it from you?
No, they told my parents first, and then they had to tell me. And I'll never forget the look in their eyes, the anguish and the pain.
Images from the murder terrified Chicagoans. They wanted to know every new clue that could lead to the capture of this savage killer. Police investigated every possible lead. An abandoned car with blankets in the back seat was found near the murder scene but failed to provide any vital clues. The first suspect was Hector Verbaugh, a janitor in the building where the body was believed to be dismembered. After his release from custody, the police paid Verbaugh $20,000 as compensation for their treatment of him during the investigation. Author Dolores Kennedy spent 3 years researching this crime for her book, William Herron's His Day in Court.
The investigation wore on in the Degnan case, and this had far-reaching effects in the city of Chicago because the police were not able to bring anybody in that they could hang on to. And the state's attorney was frustrated, and policemen were losing their jobs, and there was a big shakeup in the department because the public outcry to catch this man or woman was enormous. The Chicago public was afraid for its children.
As the investigation dragged on, more rumors and unsubstantiated stories surfaced. Some involved the victim's family.
They would write things they thought we should say, which sounded ridiculous, but I don't think it was, it didn't harm us. There was nothing they could do that would harm us any more than we had been harmed.
Oh, they never tried to make an accusation that maybe some family member had been responsible?
Well, I suppose they would make insinuations like that, because that probably is not that uncommon if you don't know anything and you're looking at all avenues.
On the evening of June 27th, the police got lucky with a new lead in this frustrating case. A 17-year-old University of Chicago student was arrested for attempted burglary and assault around this apartment building in the 6900 block of North Wayne Avenue. Within one day, the focus of the Degnan case shifted, and William Herons remained in the spotlight throughout the summer of '46. On the evening Herons burglarized this apartment building on North Wayne Avenue, he lost his freedom, but gained the dubious honor of becoming a household name. The entire city and country knew him as William Herons. Today, Herons and his supporters pronounce the name Hirons. Despite the prejudice associated with the name Herons, we will continue with the familiar pronunciation to avoid confusion. For most Chicagoans growing up during the Depression years, life did not always reflect the smiles portrayed in family photos. For the Herons, money was tight. Like most children during that time, Bill Herons went to work at an early age to help defray family expenses. A simple delivery job began a life of crime that would end a half-century later in the Vienna Correctional Center in southern Illinois. What prompted the need for you to make that first burglary?
At the time, I was delivering for a grocery store, and I had made a mistake on the change, and I shorted myself $1. Well, I was getting paid $2.50 a week to work, and that was after school and Saturdays, and $1 was a big loss. So as I was leaving the building, I noticed an open door. It wasn't all the way open. It was cracked with a chain lock on it. But right inside there was a purse, and the purse was actually open. When I first took that $1, after that it became easier, and then I went into regular burglary.
After his arrest and confession of 11 burglaries in which he stole 3 guns and $3,500 worth of loot, 13-year-old Bill Herons was sent away to St. Bede's Academy.
I think the Hirons family was in deep emotional trouble and had been for a long time. The relationship between Margaret and George was very bad. So there was a lot of fighting in the Hirons household. So he got in kind of a habit of when the fights would break out, he would leave. And oftentimes, as it developed, when he left, he would go someplace nearby and burglarize.
There was a security that I felt having money. In fact, I wouldn't spend it, I'd saved it.
When you entered the University of Chicago, did you feel the need to burglarize?
How long do you think $500 lasted you at the University of Chicago?
Not very long.
Even in those days, it went 1 quarter and that was it. So I found the need to have money pretty quick, and I was used to getting it by burglarizing, and I went back to it.
On the evening of July 26, 1946, an unconscious Bill Herons was admitted to Edgewater Hospital. Police had hit him over the head with a flower pot after he resisted arrest. Within hours, police discovered plenty of stolen loot when they illegally searched his parents' house and his dorm room at the University of Chicago. He was fingerprinted when he came to the following morning.
They took my fingerprints, and the attendant that was accompanying the fellow, he asked, well, what are you doing that for? He said, well, he's a suspect in the Degnan case. So that really scared me then.
After faking unconsciousness for as long as he could, Herons was transferred to an examining room at Bridewell Hospital and strapped down for questioning.
When you look back on it, it's kind of funny in a way, because they say, we know you did it. they want you to confess. Well, if they know you did it, then why do they want you to confess?
A day later, on June 28, police announced the fingerprints from the Degnan ransom note matched Herron's. Assistant State's Attorney William Crowley offered him a life sentence in return for a confession. Bill refused. The following day, June 29, Herron's was illegally injected with sodium pentothal, a drug known as the truth serum. Though transcripts of that interview were never made public, it is known that a portion of that 3-hour questioning centered on George, a character in a letter found in Herron's pocket when he was arrested.
I had written a story when I was in high school that I got an A on, and I was just going to expand on that one. And the letter was an introduction to the story. It was a letter to between the characters. And that was in my, I had already done that part of it, and that was in my pocket. And when they found that, I figured there was more people involved. They took the letter as being actually fact.
Rumor had it that he said George was a bad boy and George did it, and he blamed everything on George. We don't know if that's a fact because we've never seen the transcript, and we know that there were a lot of things that were made up. So all we have to go by is what the newspapers came up with.
Herron's middle name is George, so many concluded George might have been William Herron's alter ego. Dr. Roy Grinker, who administered the sodium pentothal, testified in the 1952 post-conviction hearing that Herron's was a schizophrenic. Many other psychiatrists who examined him in 1946 and through the years have found no signs of split personality.
Dr. Grinker wrote Bill a letter and said, "You never confessed to any murders under sodium pentothal." Yet the state's attorney's office used the seed of doubt. And the sodium pentothal interview, since it was never released and was never made public, allowed the press to utilize it. Whenever they didn't understand something, they would say, well, he must have talked about it under sodium pentothal.
Transcripts of the sodium pentothal interview have never been released, but bits and pieces were leaked to the newspapers 3 weeks after the sodium pentothal questioning. According to William Herron's, on June 30th, his 4th day in police custody, he was given a spinal tap, but not allowed the normal 8 hours recuperation period. 15 minutes after this painful procedure, police carried him back to the Detective Bureau for more questioning, and the first of 2 lie detector tests.
It was some years later, a book came out written by Reed and Inbow, who had developed the system and who had, I think Reed was even present during this time. And there was a footnote that showed a graph of Bill's lie detector test when he had been questioned about the Degnan crime. And the footnote said, as you can see, this doesn't always work because it showed Bill Herron's to be innocent, and we all know he's guilty.
Bill Herron's was released after 6 days in police custody and collapsed as he signed into county jail. He finally met with the attorneys his parents arranged for him. Margaret and George Herron's, his parents, had only been allowed a brief visit prior to that.
My mother got in to see me one time. And so when she asked me, she said, did you kill Suzanne Degnan? I said, no. That's when she told me that they had attorneys. They were trying to get in, but they wouldn't let them in. And then she was taken out.
5 days after Herron's first meeting with his defense attorneys, they met with the state's attorney to discuss a plea bargain agreement. Over the next week, Herron's fingerprints were linked to a second murder and the palm prints on the back of the Degnan ransom note. After another week, defense attorneys met again with the prosecution.
They came to see me on Monday, and they said, they told me you'll have to get off the fence. Either take this plea bargain or say that absolutely you'll never take it, one way or another. And they ran down what the situation was. With the publicity, it'd be awfully hard to get a trial, a fair trial, almost impossible. And the electric chair looked very, very likely.
On Tuesday, July 17th, the Tribune ran a detailed story of the Degnan murder and the 2 other murders. Herrens was named as the murderer before he was even indicted or had confessed. Sources for the article were not specifically named, and no one knows where the leak came from. But from Herrens' point of view, this story affected his decision.
So I had to decide for myself whether or not I could get a fair trial. And I told my attorneys then, I said, give me time to think it over. And that evening after they had left, then the radio in the county jail, which is speakers on the sides of the wall, blared through that the Tribune had published the confession story. There was no confession story at all. Here I'm thinking about whether or not to take the plea bargain or not. And when that came down, that was devastating. I figured, well, what the heck now? Who the heck is going to give me a fair trial now?
After the Tribune article, he agreed to the plea bargain. For the next 9 days, Herrens and his attorneys wrote his confession, which included details about the knife used in the Degnan murders. The Tribune broke a story about the knife before he presented his confession. How the Tribune obtained this information still remains a mystery, since only Herrens, his parents, and the attorneys had seen the confession document. On August 7th, he officially confessed, and on September 5th, he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences for murder. At the time William Herrens confessed, the state's main evidence included handwriting analysis of the ransom note, finger and palm prints from the ransom note, as well as the knife from the L-tracks. William Herrens lacked a hard and fast alibi for the 3 murders in which he was accused. The state's attorney's chief of criminal appeals division, Terrence Madsen, has opposed Herrens' recent legal attempts to be released from jail. Looking over the evidence, do you really think it was solid enough to convict him if he had gone to trial?
I think that if he had gone to trial, he would have been convicted. And I think that because I don't think that necessarily the development of the evidence would have stopped. When it all happened so quickly with the plea, and they had the evidence of the burglary, and they had the evidence surrounding the note. So they had a lot of circumstantial evidence to support the plea, and then they got the confession and they got the plea, and there was no need to go any further.
After Herrens was sentenced, State's Attorney William Toohey stated, "The small likelihood of a successful murder prosecution of William Herrens early prompted the state's attorney to seek out and obtain the cooperative help of the defense counsel, and through them, that of their client." Attorney William O'Donnell has represented Herrens legally since 1973.
I think what happened here was that a combination of factors really went to the heart of our criminal legal system and literally destroyed the adversarial system. And when you stop and think about it, that is really the most fundamental part of our criminal legal system. It's more important than jury trial, presumption of innocence, reasonable doubt, or anything else. Because our system is one where people contest the truth by an adversarial process. But unfortunately, the combination of pretrial publicity and the threat of the death penalty literally destroyed any opportunity to have an adversarial proceedings.
William Herrens entered prison in September 1946. Since then, he became the first Illinois prisoner to earn a college degree. He continues to study law and handles cases for himself and other inmates. He worked for years as a TV repairman and now assists the Catholic chaplain at the Vienna Correctional Center, an ultra-minimum security prison in southern Illinois. James Degnan and Betty Finn, Suzanne Degnan's brother and sister, join the state every year in a campaign against Herrens' parole.
William Herrens has been in prison for all but several years of his life since he hit the age of reason. when he was allowed to be free, he was out of control. Pleaded to be captured because he couldn't control himself. He's never had control when left alone. When put into a society where he's under control, he's flourished, he's thrived, he's served others. And I think it's a real obvious conclusion that objectively speaking, he has no business being out of that environment.
If you take away some incentive or hope that if they go down there and they change their life, they turn it around 180 degrees, get a college education. Bill has helped many, many people during his life, even though he's been in prison. If you take that away from him, what is left? Can we expect anything from our criminal legal system?
When that deal was struck with 3 natural life terms, it was the public's expectation at that time that Herons would never be released. And there is still a large segment of the population that wants the state to hold to that commitment and hold Herons to that commitment.
The importance of this story goes far beyond William Heron's attempt to be free or those determined to keep him in prison. The right to a fair, impartial trial with loyal and effective legal representation is essential. If the system breaks down like it did in 1946, questions about truth and justice may never be answered.